Hey, Manadad here to talk about Dominaria Remastered, specifically playing it in limited, meaning draft or sealed. Normally with these videos, I am joined by my mythic drafter brother, Broby1 Kenobi, but he is not available at this time. So we're just going to power through it solo as we do. This is a really deep dive, so if you want just a quick overview of this format, my paper playing friends, then I can recommend Nikolai Bolas did a nice short video. Lords of Limited did a slightly longer video, but I'm going to go really in depth, talk about all the archetypes and everything else. Let's see what I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about the release dates. We're going to talk about what is the draft booster contents, rare, uncommon, all that stuff. What are the money cards? Official archetypes, hidden archetypes, and Buildarounds. Before that we get into the archetype layout, we will talk about mana bases and fixing and what is available in the format, which kind of will give you a baseline of like how many shenanigans can I get up to. Won't stop some of you, I know. We got removal by color, combat tricks by color. So what to be aware of in terms of how how powerful the creatures are versus the removal in the format, and then combat tricks, what to be aware of when your opponent has some mana open and you're going into combat. And then top commons, these are my predicted top commons. And no, I'm not agreeing with everybody who's already weighed in on their top commons. So you'll get a slightly different opinion on that. And if you want to, you can skip to the end of the video. I'll have all these chapter marked. But stick around and listen to this format because it's really cool. It is available January 13th on Magic Online and in paper, but it will not be on Arena. And there are no other official events on the Wizards calendar. So January 13th, get at it, go to your game store, play it, buy it, play with your friends. I think boxes are already circulating. Maybe they're just the collector boxes, but anyways, a lot of the cards are out there already as I record this. So what are the money drafts? We got Force of Will, Urza Lord High Artificer. This is a set, by the way, with 27 different previous Magic sets providing cards for this set. All set on the plane of Dominaria. That's the really only organizing principle, which is such a wide net. And so they can really pull in a lot of cards that really needed reprints. And that's what a lot of these are. Vampiric Tutor, we've got the whole Tutor cycle. The 1-mana Tutor cycle here. We got Yawgmoth, Thran Physician. And of course, some of these cards are in borderless, and some of them are in old border. Those are generally worth more than the regular versions, and that's why I'm showing you the value versions. It looks like here, other than with Urza, I picked the highest value version for each card. Other than with Urza, it looks like the borderless is what people want, at least in pre-release prices. Yawgmoth, Sylvan Library, Urza's Incubator, Enlightened Tutor, Entomb, No Mercy, Dark Depths, Worldly Tutor, and World Gorger Dragon are the top money cards to be aware of. Okay, so this is a Wizards official graphic of what is in the packs. I'm only showing you the draft boosters. They are making collector boosters, I believe, for this. But what we care about is we have one rare or mythic, a borderless rare or mythic, or a retro rare or mythic in the main rare slot. And then you're going to get one common or retro common uncommon. So you could have a 4 uncommons pack. You got 3 uncommons, and then one of those could be borderless. You got 9 commons, and one of them could be a traditional foil of any rarity. So you could have a double rare pack if you get a foil rare. You're going to get 1 retro basic land, which I believe will be drafted, and then 1 token or add card. So pretty standard pack, really. Most packs are going to be 1 rare, 3 uncommons, bunch of commons, and a land. So how does that break down? Because this is like a master style set, the archetypes are not necessarily as defined or as synergistic as core set, but what we've got is we've got blue white blink, blue black is control, black red is goblins and zombies, probably a little more goblins than zombies, as we'll talk about. Red-green has a cycling theme. Green-white has threshold. White-black life payment. Blue-red storm. Storm is very interesting. I'm going to have a lot to say about that. Black-green midrange. I think that's just kind of what they call it when something's like graveyard value. Red-white is an auras theme, which is interesting, and green-blue is a ramp theme. So before we dive into what those decks will look like, let's talk about the mana bases. We have 5 enemy fast lands, right? That's what these are called, like Clifftop Retreat. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain. Oh, it's Buddy Lands. That's what these are called, right? Mountain or plains. So these are good. These are decent value. Definitely popular in Commander and things like that. But not the top value cards in the packs, as we saw. So we have 5 of those. We have Gemstone Mine. We have 5 of these tri-land layers, and they're kind of bounced lands. They're not going to put you up a mana, but you're going to not get some card disadvantage, if that makes sense. You have to return a non-layer land you control, but you can tap that land for mana first. So, anyways, I think these will be playable. And then I didn't put all of them on here, but we have the 5 of the cycling lands, like Drifting Meadow. And of course, that will be very important for cycling decks. And most of the people who have drafted with these cycling lands are saying take them fairly high, but not like first, second, maybe third pick. But they're very good for smoothing out your mana and preventing flood and such. In terms of colorless fixing, you have one option at common, which is the Terminal Moraine, which is a colorless land that you can sacrifice to get a basic, and it does come into play tapped. Pretty meh. Or you can get Lotus Blossom as a rare. Not that exciting of the cards that say Lotus. In terms of other fixing, we got Birds of Paradise. That's it. And that's at rare. It is the cool old Mark Poole art, though, so that's pretty cool if you get that. All right, so let's talk about the archetypes. First one up here, we'll talk about Blue-White Blink. It has the mythic common of the set, or what looks to be anyway, Mana War. This is a 2/2 jellyfish that can bounce a creature back to its owner's hand. And of course, if you can bounce or blink the jellyfish, then you can just be bouncing your opponent's whole board and getting in and winning. So you're looking for ETB creatures. You got stuff like Cleric of the Forward Order, which will gain 2 life for each creature you control named Cleric of the Forward Order, which includes itself. So you can just be bouncing or blinking that and gaining 2 life. You got stuff like White Mane Lion, which can bounce something back to your hand. Again, this is a low-powered set in terms of creatures in some ways, I think. Like, I think Phantom Flock will be playable. It's essentially a 3/3 flyer that winds down when it gets damaged. And so, of course, if you can bounce or blink it and bring it back with the full counters, that's good. You've got Wormfang Drake, which enters the battlefield, and you sacrifice it unless you exile a creature you control other than Wormfang Drake. And when it leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So, put your Mana War, tuck your Mana War under it, and then when they remove it, the Mana War comes back and bounces something, stuff like that. Floodgate is a very interesting card. I've never played with it. I have heard of it. If it gets flying, you have to sacrifice it. When it leaves the battlefield, it deals damage to each non-blue creature without flying, equal to half the number of islands you control rounded down. So, of course, you can really use this to wipe out a bunch of small non-flyers with blink effects. So the other key common there is going to be Momentary Blink, which is an instant that exiles a creature you control and returns it to the battlefield under its owner's control, which will be playable in non-blue decks, but it does have the flashback ability, so you can get 2 blinks out of it. So you can really start getting some value out of that. Some rares that you might be interested in playing in this archetype, we've got Umbilicus, which at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may pay 2 life. If they don't, they return a permanent they control to its owner's hand. Obviously, you have lots of permanents you'd like to bounce and replay, so that's a positive for you, and it's just a negative for your opponent. Triskelion enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Remove a +1/+1 counter from it, and deals 1 damage to any target, and then bouncing or blinking will reset that. This is 6 mana. There's good combos with Triskelion, but not in this particular pod. But it is a fun commander card and such. In terms of like signpost uncommons, they're not always really signposts, but in the case of Sawtooth Loon, they are. And it's a 2/2 flyer. When it enters, you return a white or blue creature you control to its owner's hand. And then when it enters, you also draw 2 cards, put 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your library. So you can bounce back a creature you're not going to need for the rest of the game, something small like, say, your Icacian Javelineers over here, or something that you do want to replay, and then do a little card filtering. The Javelineers, this does make some people's list of top commons in the set, and I can understand that. Not having played it yet, I can't say for sure, but there are a lot of X1s running around, meaning a lot of 1 toughness creatures. And essentially it comes down with a counter, which is a javelin counter. You can throw that javelin 1 time. So you get the 1 throw of the javelin to deal 1 damage to any target. So by blinking it, you can get more than 1 throw of the javelin, and you can really keep the board clear of those pesky little creatures. Also at the top end of this deck, you could run a 4/5 flyer, which when it enters, you look at the top 4 cards of your library and put them back in any order. And then it has a nice mana sink there. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put them back in any order. I think really probably you're going to be more... if you get a bunch of mana wars, then you go hard on this deck and just try to bounce your opponent's board and get in with, stuff like Wormfang Drake, or, stuff that doesn't cost quite as much as 7. But you never know. You can definitely make a grindy version of this deck. There are some control cards in these colors, as we will see later. Green-white Threshold. This is another one that's an interesting archetype, and they really do support it, it looks like, decently well. First of all, the signpost uncommon Mystic Enforcer is a 3/3 protection from black, and when you got Threshold, it's going to get +3/+3 and flying, so it's going to be a 6/6 flyer. And protection from black is no joke in this format, because there's some pretty good black removal. And black is shaping up to be one of the stronger colors, if not the strongest color. There's rares like Savin's Reclamation, which is gonna, if you get a bunch of cards in your graveyard, you can bring back things. You've got Nantuko Monastery, which you can actually fetch up with Crop Rotation, which is going to put a land in your graveyard, fetch that onto the battlefield for you, and you can eventually turn it into a 4/4 green and white insect monk with first strike. The Fadia Seer, which is kind of ramp, kind of just a threshold enabler. You draw a card, reveal it. If it isn't a land, you discard it, so you can just start filling up your graveyard with it. As a 1/1 for 2. You've got Krosan Resorer, which has a threshold ability to untap 3 lands for ramp. Maybe a little bit more important in the ramp deck, but there is Wild Growth also at common, so that's a Krosan Restorer. Wild Growth is essentially a 2-card package you're going to want in any green deck. Then we got Millikin, which is tap, add a colorless mill a card. I prefer that over the Fadia Seer, but it is uncommon. So if you're trying to build this deck, I think losing that 1 power is worth it, just to have the ramp and to have the just general mill, easy mill. There are a couple things that care about lands in your graveyard, so that will be relevant for that also, in the way that the Fadia Seer doesn't work with it. Mystic Zealot has Threshold. It's a 2/4. It's a 2/4. Doesn't become a flyer till you get Threshold, but a 2/4 for 4 in this format is decent stats. There's a couple red spells that deal 4 damage, but 4 and as usual, between 3 and 4 looks to be an important toughness break, and we'll talk more about that in the removal section. But I think Mystic Zealot is going to be solid in this deck. You've also got stuff, you can look for stuff with cycling, which is a good way to fill up your graveyard. You've got things like Radiance Judgment, which is pretty good. If in the early game, or if it looks like a deck that's not going to have a lot of creatures with power 4 or greater, you can just cycle that, draw another card, and start filling up that graveyard, get to Threshold. Things that might put you in the deck include this Mythic Hunting Grounds, which is a nice, it's a popular commander card. So you could draft that and use it in your commander deck, but doesn't do anything till you get Threshold. But once you do, you can just start putting your creatures into play. It just makes it really hard for opponents, and it's really hilarious when they go play a spell before combat, and you're like, drop a giant creature. Nomad Decoy. It's another one that people think will be one of the top white commons. It's a 1/2 tapper, and when you get Threshold, you can tap 2 creatures for white. Vigilant Sentry, another just bread and butter. The mana cost is a little rough, 1 white for a 2/2, but it will get +1/+1, and especially having these in multiples, if you have Threshold, gets really, really tricky, because making an attacking or blocking creature get +3/+3 with a tap just makes combat, just wrecks combat for your opponent. So that can be a surprisingly fun card. We've got Battlefield Scrounger here. It's a 3/3 for 5. And if you have Threshold, you put 3 cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, and it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. The thing about this is, maybe if you feel like you're going to deck yourself, if you're actually very good at milling, you want to run 1 or 2 of these in your deck, and that way, if you start really filling up the graveyard too much, you can start putting cards back into your deck with a Battlefield Scrounger. All right, red-green cycling. The 2 cards, the 2 uncommons that I think you want in this deck are Invigorating Boon, which was whenever a player cycles a card, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and your opponents will be cycling cards some. And Lightning Rift, whenever a player cycles a card, you can pay 1. If you do Lightning Rift, deals 2 damage to any target. So if you get 1 or both of these out and then just have a handful of cyclers, it gets kind of ridiculous, the value. The value train you can get on, and of course you can also run lands like Slippery Karst and Smoldering Crater. You can even run off-color lands, because the cycling cost is colorless. You got Spark Spray, which is kind of a meh removal spell, but it does cycle for 1 red. And of course, cheap cyclers are very valuable. Gem Palm Incinerator, if you can get multiples of that, it is a little tricky because it is uncommon. But there are a lot of common goblins in this set, so Gem Palm Incinerator looks like it'll play in this deck. You've got Elvish Aberration, which is a good one for the cycling decks, right? It's forest cycling, first of all, so you have it in your opening hand, you can just trade it for a land, and then if you do a draw at late game, it's a big 4/5 body that can also tap and add a bunch of mana. Wild Dogs, this is a card I don't think many people are going to take. I think you can let those wheel quite a bit, but because it's just a nice 1-drop, 2 cycling, if you do think your deck's going to get out to an aggro start, you can get it on board. I guess make sure your opponent's not in white, because there's a lot of life gain in white. But if not, you can get it on board and smash in with it. There's quite a few 2/1s in the set, and as I said, a lot of things that deal 1 damage in the set. But then if it's not relevant to the matchup, you just cycle it. Mace Tail Histrodon is a 4/4 first strike cycling haste, similar to the Elvish Aberration. This is sort of like your red top end card. You can play off color cycling if you get desperate. If it's anything like the Ikoria cycling decks, you will be able to run fewer lands because you're cycling so much that you're going to cycle into lands, and you can run off color cycling like Veiled Serpent or Street Wraith, which cycles just for life. And of course, if you can cycle enough lands into your graveyard, Terravore is going to be super good. All right, so blue-black is the official control color. I feel like white is also an honorary control color. You have the tapper. You have Absorb here, the second card in at rare. for a blue-white card. But the quote-unquote signpost card is Recoil, which is just a bounce and a discard all in one, and it's instant speed. So skillful players will be able to really make use of that. There is also a cycle of these split cards. We've got Spite and Malice here, which the blue side is counter a non-creature spell, and the black side, which will probably cast a lot more, is destroy target non-black creature. It can't be regenerated. Essentially, it's Terror, which is also in the set. Nightscape Familiar, I think this is going to be a good card for your control decks. It's going to make all your blue spells cost 1 less, which will be nice, and it's got regenerates for 2, so it'll hold down the ground very nicely. Counterspell is in this at common, so that's going to be something to watch out for, and probably will make control decks A, more appealing, and B, better. And of course, people will open Force of Will in this set, and they're not going to pass that card. That's the big money card of the set. So if you open Force of Will, you might go, okay, I guess I'll do a control deck. So you might see more people getting into control than usual just because of cards like Force of Will. You've got Icy Manipulator, you've got Maze of Ith at rare. There's also sort of a unspoken madness theme to blue and black. Aquamoeba is your only discard outlet that's free. Actually, shouldn't say it's your only discard outlet. There's another one that's discard 2 cards, make a zombie. That's a free discard outlet. But that requires 2 cards. Aquamoeba is a good free discard outlet. It's only 2 to get on the battlefield, first of all, on a 1/3, so it's going to block fairly good in the early game. And then when you need to activate your madness cards, like Circular Logic, say, you have a free way to do so. There's also Urborg Siphon Mage, which can discard a card for 3 and tap and do a little bit of draining, which is good way for a control deck to close out the game. And we also have Chainer's Edict, which is a very strong sacrifice card. It's just a 2-mana, target player sacrifices a creature, which is a pretty standard card, but it does have flashback for 7, which just becomes relevant. You can really pare down your opponent's boards, although I would try to keep them clear of all the 1/1 Goblins. Another one I think a lot of people are going to go into, we've got Tatyova in this set as the signpost for Simic, for green-blue. And Tatyova, if you don't know, she's a mythic uncommon in every set she's been in. 3/3, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life and draw a card. Just ridiculous. Of course, all you're going to want to do is play, one of the things you're just going to do naturally in Magic is just play lands. So Tatyova, very good. She's going to encourage you to play lands. You've got stuff like Krosan Resor, Wild Growth, Millikin, Werebear, Fadiasir. Fadiasir works very nicely with Tatyova, of course. But we've also got Nature's Lore, which I didn't put on this card. But there's things to bring lands in. Anyways, what are you ramping to? Well, you got stuff like Dragon Engine, which is a good outlet for a bunch of mana. At the top end, you could put something like a rare like Denizen of the Deep, which probably not a lot of people will be drafting, so that will probably mostly go to green-blue. Glintwing Invoker has a nice mana sink there for 8 mana, +3/+3 and flying. Time Stretch, if you happen to get the mythic Time Stretch, that's a good thing to ramp into. Stroke of Genius at rare, you can do a super draw a ton of cards and just win at instant speed. Kavu Primarch is going to kind of be a bread and butter where you can get a 3/3 for 4, and it convokes, first of all. And then if you can kick it, you're going to get it with 4 +1/+1 counters and get a nice beefy 7/7 when you've ramped. Blue, red, and I'm going to say green Storm, because when I was looking at this set, it looked to me like you could build red-green Storm maybe as easily as you can build blue-red Storm. So what is Storm? Storm is a mechanic where for each spell you've cast before at that turn, you copy the spell. And actually, here, let's just jump ahead to I guess I should have organized this differently. But if you look at these last 2 cards, Grape Shot and Empty the Warrens, okay? Those say Storm. When you cast the spell, copy it for each spell cast before this turn. Empty the Warrens is the real main one we're going to try to be storming off with in this deck. Okay, if you don't get Empty the Warrens, I'd say don't play this deck. So you can play 0 casting cost artifacts like Ornithopter. You can play stuff like Ice from Fire and Ice, which will tap a permanent, draw a card. You can play stuff that will give you mana back, like Cloud of Fairies, which essentially you play it, you untap 2 lands, so it was like it was free. Snap, you play it, you untap 2 lands, it was like it's free. You have rares like Helm of Awakening, which makes stuff cost 1 less. An Overmaster, which is essentially a cantrip, is 1 red, draw a card. Rada, Heir to Keld, can give you some ramp. It's pretty cheap to cast. Emerald Charm, you can pay a green to untap target permanent, which could include the forest that you tap to pay for Emerald Charm, so that's another just free tick up the storm count. Obsessive Search is a blue, draw a card, and you can madness it. Frantic Search is another one that's just free, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, untap up to 3 lands. You can see there's just a ton of support for this. Turnabout, choose artifact, creature, or land, tap all untap permanents of the chosen type, and then untap all tap permanents of that type. So tap all your lands, play this, untap all your lands. Peregrine Drake, 5 mana, but it gives you a 5 mana discount. I don't like that as much, but you can still run it in this deck. There's the Croson Restorer Wild Growth thing, where you put the Wild Growth on the land, you tap it for green, you untap it with Croson Restorer, you're going to get a lot of mana value out of that. High Tide for the blue side, so make all your islands tap for an additional blue, which is nice. Coal Stoker, which ends up netting you 3 red back, so it's just 1 red essentially to cast it once you get up to the amount of mana. There's Nature's Lore, puts a forest into play, and I'll note that the forest does not come into play tapped, so essentially this is like 1 green. 1 green spell, 1 green mana spell in terms of what it's costing you. Fire Blast you can cast by sacrificing 2 mountains rather than paying its mana cost. I mean, if you're really going all in on the storm, that's what you got to do. And then you have things like Wild Dogs, which just costs a green, but you can also cycle it. And I don't think anybody, as I said before, I don't think anybody's going to want Wild Dogs. Okay, so once you've done all that, hopefully you still have mana left over. You've calculated it correctly to play something like a Storm Entity, which has haste, and it's going to enter with a +1/+1 counter for each other spell cast this turn. So some places where the board is empty, that'll be worthwhile, and it is only 2 mana. There's also Grape Shot, which will deal 1 damage to any target, and you can absolutely, if you can get somebody low enough, you can finish them off with Grape Shot. Going from 20 to 0 with Grape Shot is probably too difficult. But the real one you want to be able to pull off is Empty the Warrens. So, cast 5 spells, cast Empty the Warrens, all of a sudden you got 10 1/1 goblins. And it's going to be very hard for an opponent to win that game with so many goblins swarming the board. Speaking of goblins, Black-Red is Goblins and Zombies, the signpost being Dralnu's Crusade. All goblins get +1/+1, and all goblins are black and a zombie in addition to their other creature types. Not super relevant other than that last card there, Dedapult, does have a sacrifice a zombie theme. So I guess if you're really confident you can get Dralnu's Crusade and a bunch of goblins out, then you can try to do that combo. But it seems a little bit of a good luck with that kind of thing. Well, you do have some zombie goblins, like Festering Goblin there. But anyways, Empty the Warrens we talked about. There's also Mog War Marshal, which is essentially 2 1/1 goblins for the price of 2 mana. We've got Goblin Turncoat, which sacrifices a goblin to regenerate, which is pretty useful. Goblin Matron, which is going to search you up a goblin. Skirk Proc Spectre lets you sacrifice goblins to turn them into red mana. Also useful in a Storm deck, right? For that big turn where you need a bunch of mana. A lot of rares will probably put people into this deck. You've got stuff like Cryptic Gateway, which taps 2 untapped creatures you control and put a creature card from your hand that shares a creature type. With each creature tapped this way onto the battlefield, really, Goblins is where it's at in terms of tribal decks. So if you're going to try to build around Cryptic Gateway, Goblins is where I would start. Also Urza's Incubator, which makes creatures, spells of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. You got Pashalic Mons, which is a 2/2 goblin for 3, and when it or another goblin dies, it deals 1 damage to any target, and you can use it to sacrifice goblins to make more goblins. Similar to Siege Gang Commander, 5 mana, 2/2. When it enters, it makes 3 1/1s with it. It just brings an army, and then you can sacrifice goblins to throw them for 2 damage. And there's goblins that like to be sacrificed, like Festering Goblin, which can give creatures -1/-1. So goblins and zombies looks like a fun, just kind of aristocrats sacrifice deck. All right, now we're getting into the less defined archetypes. Black-green midrange. I think this will be fairly strong because midrange is always strong in limited. First of all, your signpost is a 6/6 for 5 that has upside, which is when it deals damage to a creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can regenerate for a black. And there's the probably never going to be used ability of green Spiritmonger becomes the color of your choice until end of turn. You got Phyrexian Rager, bread and butter, black creature, Chainer's Edict, which will be nice to just grind out value. Undead Gladiator, which lets you discard cards to bring it back, and you can also cycle it. Urborg Uprising. This should be, I think, a surprisingly strong card. It is a sorcery. It is 5 mana. So turn 5 not affecting the board is pretty rough, but you're going to be able to get back 2 creatures from your graveyard, and you have lots of creatures, as we've seen, that want to end up in the graveyard. Then you also draw a card. So pretty good card advantage spell if you're a grindier deck. Life and Death, great split card. Penumbra Bobcat, this is a 2/1 that dies into a 2/1. Call of the Herd is a 3/3, and then it can flash back. Gamekeeper, when it dies, you exile it and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. A lot of people play around this kind of card more than they need to. So, I mean, the chances are you're not going to hit Symbiotic Beast with it when it dies, but people will not block it and take that risk. And if your average card isn't much different than a 2/2, it's probably worth just throwing it in there and your average creature card. Throwing it into combat, see if they block it or not. If they do, no big deal. You brought out another card. And so you've got Symbiotic Beast. When it dies, you get 4 1/1 green insect creature tokens, which is nice to have creatures to sacrifice always. Deadwork Treefolk 3/6 is a big butt in this format. It is going to vanish at a certain point, but when it leaves, you're going to return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand, so you get a little value there. Necro Savant is a 5/5 for 6, and you can sacrifice a creature to bring it back from the graveyard to the battlefield during your upkeep only. Red-white auras. The signpost here is Tiana's Ship's Caretaker. 3/3 flying, first strike. Not too bad. Wears auras and equipment quite nicely. There are no equipment. There might be some equipment in this format, but it's not really relevant. What's relevant is the auras. And the bad part about auras is when they die, but if you have Tiana out, you get them back into your hand. I think you're also really, I mean, more than you want Tiana, you want Mesa Enchantress, which turns all your auras into cantrips, which is great. You've also got an uncommon Valduk, Keeper of the Flame, another legendary creature. If you can pop some auras on that, it's going to make 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with trample and haste. The other one, the creature at common that you really want to pop auras on, is a 2/1 double strike, Ridgetop Raptor. Very fragile. Playing auras on creatures is a high risk, high reward strategy anyway. But yeah, be really confident. Maybe have enough mana to play an aura that gives it some toughness right afterwards. You got Auramancer to bring auras back from your graveyard. Thran Golem is another one. It is 5 mana to get down, but once you get it down, you can start slapping auras on it. It gets quite good. It becomes 5/5 flying first strike trample at the moment it gets an aura on it, not to mention whatever the aura adds. Your big cheap aura here at common is Spirit Link, which is like Lifelink, but not quite the same. There are some like enchantments, some auras in this format that will allow you to tap the creature to deal the damage. So I guess Lifelink works that way too. The thing with Spirit Link is you can play it on your opponent's creature, right? So when that creature deals damage, you gain the life. It's not Lifelink where they gain the life. You would gain the life. It's the old version of lifelink essentially, and it does have a little bit of nuance, and that's why they don't just put creature has lifelink. Red auras, you got Undying Rage. Griffin Guide is probably your top aura that you're going to try to seek out with this deck. +2/+2 and flying, and then dies into a 2/2 flyer is fantastic. Sun Clasp, you you can bounce your creature back, but you're going to lose the aura. But anyways, you got Lightning Reflexes, which is sort of like an aura that's also a combat trick. And as long as you're playing lots of auras, play Pacifism for your removal. That is auras. And Black and White Life Payment. This one is kind of tricky. There's actually, we'll talk about on another slide, there are some rares that might kind of put you towards this, but it doesn't seem to be the best supported archetype. You could play this more as like a mid-range grindy or control build. I think there's a lot of ways to try and play this. But what do you got here? You've got Gerard's Verdict at the signpost level, which is target player discards 2 cards. You gain 3 life for each land card discarded this way. Pretty solid 2 mana to make somebody discard 2. Certainly worth building around. Cleric of the Forward Order gains you life. Plenty of things that gain you life, mostly in white, but you do have Urborg, Siphon Mage in black. Congregate, which is 2 life for each creature on the battlefield to a target player, which you will pretty much always be targeting yourself. Spirit Link is an aura. Keldor and Gargoyle. Neither of those are that exciting to play. Spectral Link, not a life gain card, but it is a relevant white creature with a black regenerate ability and protection from green. You've got Night and Day, which is Nightside gives a creature -1/-1 until end of turn. Day gives target player control +1/+1 until end of turn. That's sort of your overrun effect for the format. If you were going to try to go wide, there is Battle Screech in this format. If you just get a bunch of Battle Screeches or something, but then also want to play black, you got Flesh Reaver. Deals damage to whenever it deals damage to a creature or opponent, it deals that much damage to you. So 4/4 for 2, you could come out hard aggro with this and then just try to gain the life back. This is a pretty reckless strategy, but it might be good. I don't know. Haven't played with that card before. Phyrexian Scuda, which is a kicker of 3 life, and if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Umbilicus, we've talked about, is another one where people will be paying life, but you won't mind because you've got a ton of life. There's a common that gains you 6 life in white, I believe at instant speed, and cycles. So there is plenty of life gain if you want to go hard on that. Okay. What about monocolor? I just talked about Battle Screech. I think if the deck that seems to be best supported in monocolor is white, because you can go Battle Screech, which has a flashback, tap 3 untap white creatures you control. You can run Battle Screech in any deck with white in it, but if you're just doing trying to do some kind of mono white aggro deck, and hopefully you open the rare Divine Sacrament, which gives white creatures +1/+1, and Threshold, they get an additional +1/+1, and then at Mythic level, there's Gauntlet of Power, which is good in any kind of monocolor or monocolor skewing deck, because it's gonna ramp you with the basic lands. Tapping for mana of the chosen color and give creatures of the chosen color +1/+1. What about multicolor? There are 5 of these 3-color rares that you could build around. I think the ones worth building around, you've got Zur the Enchanter. Obviously, there's a lot of auras in the deck that you can just kind of attack with Zur and build up a Super Zur. That's a fun strategy in Commander, and I assume it's also going to be fun in Limited. Rith the Awakener, which deals when it deals combat damage to a player, you can pay 2 and a green, and if you do, you create a 1/1 green sapling creature token for each permanent of that color. Zira Aaron is a 1/2 flyer that you can pay 3 and tap to draw a card. Not that great. I don't think it's a push into 3-color. But if you happen to be in those colors, good for you. Sulkanar is a 5-mana 5/5 with Swamp Walk. That might be, I mean, it's definitely going to be strong if you can play it. And as we saw, there are the 3-color tri-lands. You got Arcades Sabbath, really hard to cast, really intensive mana cost, but if you do get it out, 7/7 flyer, that's going to close out the game pretty fast. And then if you really want to have fun, you could open Legacy Weapon at Mythic, and for a Wooburg, you can exile target permanent, and if it would be put into a graveyard, you shuffle it back into your library. So, yeah, the first thing you kill costs you 12 mana, 5 of which has to be Wooburg. But somebody's going to play it and win games with it, and it'll be hilarious. Could be you. Okay, here's the real hidden archetype everybody's talking about. Horseshoe Crab at common, Hermetic Study at common. This is a 2-card combo you'll just be happy with in any blue deck, I think. But if you really get a ton of crabs and a ton of Hermetic Studies, and maybe even branch out into red with Quicksilver Dagger and Goblin Medics, which deals an additional damage when it taps, you can really go to town. So say you're in mono blue, you get the Horseshoe Crab, you get the Hermetic Study on it, you pop a High Tide, and then you just go pew, 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 and make a laser crab. Crabs with freaking laser beams attached to their foreheads. This is going to be a hilarious, hilarious deck for those that know how to build around it. So good luck with that. That will be really fun. But there are other hidden archetypes in this format. One of which we mentioned earlier here, Life Gain. So at Mythic, you can get Test of Endurance, where you can win the game if you have 50 or more life on your upkeep. There's also Sarah Avatar, whose power and toughness are equal to your life total. And it dies, it goes, or dies or gets milled, it goes right back into your library, which is kind of cool. A little bit anti-threshold, but there you go. And then, so pretty strong life gain. You just get it. I think you'll probably be able to get a bunch of Cleric of the Forward orders. That's something you'll be able to draft in multiples. Remedies, you should be able to draft. I guess I was wrong when I said it had. Oh no, there's Renewed Faith. There is the one that has cycling. 3 mana, gain 6 life. Cycling 2. When you cycle it, you gain 2. Remedy is going to prevent damage. Not a life gain, but it is going to help keep your life total high. And then Congregate, I mean, if you really can swarm the board, especially with like Battle Screeches, just chaining together a bunch of Battle Screeches, pop a Congregate, and then the next upkeep have 50 or more life and win, that'll be hilarious. It's not going to come together that often, but when it does, it'll be pretty good. I don't think a lot of people will be heavily drafting the life gain unless you have a lot of kind of inexperienced players who don't know the problems with life gain. So if you are experienced, you may be able to take advantage of some of those mythics. Also, I think there is sort of a squirrel deck, at least a squirrel package. You've got Nut Collector at Mythic, which is a 1/1, but it's going to pop out a 1/1 squirrel on each upkeep. And by the time you got 6 mana, hopefully you've also got Threshold, which is going to give all squirrels +2/+2. So making all your squirrels 3/3s is good. There's this little green combo a lot of green players will be running anyway, which is Squirrel Nest plus Croson Restorer. So it's make 2 squirrels a turn. Pretty good. Emerald Charm. You can untap the Squirrel Nest and make another squirrel. What else did I put? Oh, you can untap Croson Restorer and then untap a bunch of squirrels. Or untap a bunch of squirrel nests. Kamal Fist of Krosa also at Mythic, but it does have an overrun effect. So if you do manage to flood the board with squirrels and saprolings and other small creatures, Kamal is going to be able to finish it off for 5 mana, giving everything +3/+3 and trample. Kamal is essentially a must kill, and plus the other extra green mana can be pumped into turning your creatures into lands. So pretty fun. Looks like you could easily build a Reanimator deck in this format. You've got Dread Returns at uncommon, and then you've got Savin's Reclamation Body Snatcher at rare. Aquamoeba is your discard outlet to put a big creature in your graveyard. I think at uncommon, Spirit Monger, Necro Savant seem to be where it's at. At common, maybe Symbiotic Beast is where it's at. The cool thing about Dread Return and Symbiotic Beast is that when Symbiotic Beast dies, you're going to get the 4 1/1 green insect creature tokens, and then the flashback for Dread Return is sacrifice 3 creatures. So you can immediately sacrifice 3 of those insects and bring back the beast. And if you really want to, you can go full on with the zombie infestation. Discard 2 cards, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token if you really need to get that big creature in your graveyard in order to bring it back. Also, I think you could build a Ponza deck. This is a very speculative. File this one under speculative, but you do have Pain and Suffering at uncommon, so you got a legitimate just destroy a land. You've got Terravore, which likes to have lands in the graveyard. So, and it's not just your own lands. People will be cycling lands into the graveyard in this format too. Then you have a lot of things that disrupt lands. You've got Ice, which taps target permanent, which includes a land. Deliver, which can bounce a permanent, including a land. Decimate can destroy a land as long as you have a target for a creature, enchantment, an artifact. I would be very careful playing Decimate, but if you're really intent on building a land disruption deck, Ponza deck, you can go for it. The better genius move, I guess, is to play Confiscate, which enchants a permanent and you control the permanent. So you, for 6 mana, you can steal their land. You go up a mana, they go down a mana. Ooh, excuse me. Umbilicus, if you do manage to keep enough permanents off the board, they're going to have to start bouncing lands or paying life. Icy Manipulator can tap lands. Recoil can actually bounce lands back to somebody's hand. And of course, Opposition, you can tap your creatures to start tapping their lands. And that is probably actually one of the better ways to just lock your opponent out of the game. If you can get a head on board with creatures, you can Opposition, just keep tapping down their stuff and make it so it's very hard for them to play anything except on their upkeep. Angel Tribal, I don't really think so. You might open a Lyra Dawnbringer, see other angels you control get +1/+1 and have lifelink. You got Sarah Angel at uncommon, Voice of All at uncommon, and Tiana Ship's Caretaker at uncommon. There's unfortunately no Segovian Angel at common to like legitimately try to build an angel build around. But if you wondered, there it is. Similarly, Chainer, Dementia Master. Of course, it makes nightmares, so it's a little bit less of a question. But there are 2 nightmares in the format: the Faceless Butcher and the Wormfang Drake. And I guess if you draft a Chainer, those go up in your pick order. But otherwise, I don't think you're really building like build around Nightmare Tribal. And of course, when it leaves the battlefield, you have to exile all nightmares. So maybe it's actually a downside to have Faceless Butcher in your deck. All right. That was all the archetypes. Now let's talk about removal. I actually sat down and I counted the creatures with each toughness in the format at common and uncommon. So there are 23 common and uncommon creatures with 1 toughness, plus many more 1/1 tokens, such as birds, and I should have said goblins, not soldiers. At 2 toughness, you have almost the same amount, a little bit more. You have 24 creatures. So keep in mind that there are a couple red spells that deal 2 damage. 3 toughness, you have 23 creatures. 4 toughness, you only got 9 creatures at common or uncommon. 5 toughness, 4 creatures, and 6+ toughness, 4 creatures. So it's not a common or uncommon. You got Birds of Paradise and 01 Flyer as an example of a 1 toughness creature over there. And Wall of Junk at uncommon is one of the 6+ toughness creatures. It's an 07 wall. And if it does block, it has to bounce back to their hand. So certainly junk in that respect. White removal. Starting off strong here. Swords to Plowshares, 1 mana, instant speed, removes anything. Plus, if you got a life gain synergy, there you go. You can remove your own creature even. Pacifism, both of those pretty strong. Order, for 4 mana, you can exile an attacking creature for the order side of Order and Chaos. Ication Javelineers, we saw how many X1s are running around that being able to kill just one of them and then have this one body left behind is not nothing. Definitely worth consideration. Nomad Decoy, I'm including this as removal. It's essentially going to tax you 1 white mana, but you're going to be able to keep down your opponent's best thing for 3 and 1 white tax. Orym's Thunder, there are some artifact creatures, and you know, the ability to hit enchantments in a set with lots of auras is not terrible. Being able to hit the pacifism. And then Radiance Judgment is another one, creature power 4 or greater, one to consider. But I think really, if you're in white, go for those Swords to Plowshares, go for that pacifism. The other stuff, in terms of removal, less premium. Blue, no removal, or a very limited removal to speak of. You do have Hermetic Study, which makes something be able to ping for 1, which is not usual ability in Modern Blue. That's something to keep in mind. Of course, we talked about the Crab Pinger deck possibility. Leaden Fists is kind of an unusual tapper spell. It's a 2 mana or 3 mana flash, enchants a creature, and it gets +3/+3, but doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So if you take a hit from something, then you can flash this down and tap it down. It is going to be big, but there's no fight spells in the format. Spoiler alert for the green removal suite. There is this weird card, Ovinomancer. It's an 0/1 for 3. You sacrifice it unless you can return 3 basic lands you control to their owner's hands. So this really puts you behind. But you can tap it and return it to its owner's hand and destroy a creature, and then they get an 0/1 green sheep creature token. So in the late game, Ovinomancer may be relevant. Also, maybe if you have Tatyova, you want to bounce your lands back because you want to replay them and draw more cards and gain more life. Confiscate. This is premium removal, but it is 6 mana, but you can just basically steal your opponent's best thing. The other more traditional blue removal, you have stuff like Ovinize, which is going to make something an 0/1 for 1 turn, which can be removal if you just got a decent blocker, a 1-power blocker. You got Snap, which can return a creature to its owner's hand, and then you untap your lands. So it is a nice bounce spell in that way, but it's just removal for a turn, similar with Deliver, Mana War, and even Turnabout is going to tap stuff down, but just for a turn. But things to think about if you need interaction with your blue deck. Black, of course, has the premium removal. You got Night, Side of Night and Day, which does a -1/-1. You've got Terror at common, which I did the math, kills 70% of creatures in the format. I think it's just slightly less than 70% because you can't count the ones that have protection from black. But anyways, Terror, 2 mana, instant speed, killing off most of the creatures in the format. Pretty good. Ichor Slick, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. That's going to kill a lot. The Malice side of Spite and Malice is essentially Terror. I mean, it is Terror, right? So that's going to kill 70% of creatures in the format. And Dark Withering, destroy target non-black creature. Doesn't hit the regenerate ones. It's like worse than Terror in a lot of ways. But if you're in a Madness deck, being able to do that for 1 black mana, I mean, if you have the Aqua Amiibos or the discard enablers for it, Dark Withering will be good. It is an uncommon instead of common. Very strange choice to have Terror at common and Dark Withering at uncommon. But anyway, I mean, that's more the traditional, I guess, distribution of those. Twisted Experiment, I would count this as removal. You can use it to take out the X ones. And then Phyrexian Debaser can tap sacrifice itself to -2/-2. But your premium stuff really is Terror and Ichor Slick. Or black. For red, we've got Chain Lightning, super premium, common, deals 3 damage to any target. It's going to take out, as you saw, a huge portion of the creatures in the format. Have 3 toughness or less. Grape Shot, which can often deal 2 damage if you can get another spell in before it, is alright. Assault deals 2 damage. Solar Blast deals 3 damage at instant speed. It can also cycle to deal a damage to a target. The big one everybody's going to go for in the pack, of course, is Flame Tongue Kavu. Kills a whopping 87% of the creatures in the format, and it's going to leave a 4/2 body behind. So pick up your Flame Tongue Kabus early and often in your red decks. Gem Palm Incinerator does have the possibility of killing creatures at instant speed with the cycling. You've also got Fire Blast, which is 6 mana instant, deal 4 damage, or you can sacrifice 2 mountains, so that can be a free spell. And Slice and Dice, another 6 mana, 4 damage to each creature, and it can also cycle to deal 1 damage to each creature. So a lot of options in red to kind of wipe those X1s off the board. Something to keep in mind if you're building a deck with lots of X1s, or if you are in red and you need to defend against that. Similarly, Sandstorm, which does 1 damage to each attacking creature. So your opponent makes all those birds and then flies them at you with their Battle Screech, and then you go, Sandstorm. I don't think most people will be playing Sandstorm because it just doesn't have... If it had cycling or some other thing, that would be a reason to main deck it, but it is a consideration for sideboard. You have Reality side of Illusion and Reality that destroys artifacts. Emerald Charm can destroy non-aura enchantments or cause creatures to lose flying, which can, in a green deck, be removal, I guess. Be similar to removal. And Break Asunder, which destroys an artifact or enchantment. But green, very weak on the removal side in this format. So be very careful if you're playing mono green or close to mono green. Combat tricks. White has Momentary Blink, so it does exile a creature they control, but the thing to keep in mind, right, if they're tapped down and you swing in with your creature, they can blink their creature and it'll come back untapped and be able to block. So that's something to keep in mind. You got Remedy, which can save a creature in combat by preventing 5 damage divided as you choose. Radiance Judgment, if you make a double block and with a creature with power 4 or greater, be careful. Look out for that Radiance Judgment. The day side of Night and Day is going to be one to play around if they've got 3 mana open. And then the Stand, prevent the next 2 damage that would be dealt to target creature this turn. A similar one where that can swing the results of the combat just enough where it doesn't work out in your favor. Blue, I put Recoil down there. Leaden Fist does have Flash, so they can get that extra 3 damage. As you recall, it comes in and gives a creature +3/+3, but it doesn't untap during its untap step. Ovi-Nice is going to be another one that Blue's going to have to make a lot of usage of. Snap is, of course, a good one, and Turnabout is instant speed, so be wary of attacking in, and then they untap their whole board and eat all your creatures on blocks. Combat tricks in black. Howl from Beyond, classic, is back here. Target creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn. Really effective on like first strike, double strike creatures, but can always trick you, and can also, you can leave that 1/1 unblocked, and then they have 9 mana, and they all of a sudden that 1/1 is a 9/1, and you're dead. Terror, we talked about Malice, Ichor Slick. Those are removal things that can also be used to 2-for-1 you in combat. Night, Recoil, Recoil is a bounce, Dark Withering, destroy target non-black creature. Yeah, lots of stuff in black to worry about when you're making blocks. It's going to be a hard format to try and decide blocks. Combat tricks in red. Spark Spray, of course, can kind of change the math of how you block. If all your guys were going to survive by 1, and then all of a sudden they Spark Spray at the end, you've lost your board. Lightning Reflexes is another one I think people will be playing because it's sort of it hits those aura synergies, but it's also like a combat trick. Fire can deal 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. Solar Blast dealing 3 damage. Gem Palm Incinerator, cycling, instant speed damage, Slice and Dice, and Fire Blast. Green, that top ability of Emerald Charm, untap target permanent, also target creature loses flying, that bottom ability, definitely relevant. Even with pacifism out there, destroy, I guess it's non-aura enchantment, so you can't destroy pacifism, but the top and bottom abilities are relevant in combat. Sandstorm. Lull is a cycling fog, which, if you make that big last attack and they fog you and then they crack back and kill you, that's, don't say I didn't warn you. Wax is more of a traditional combat trick. It's kind of like giant growth, but not quite as giant. And there is a primal boost, which is 3 mana. Target creature gets +4/+4, and you can also cycle it. And if you cycle it, you can have the creature get +1/+1, which I think a lot of people will actually do, right? So +1/+1 will either turn something into a trade or a win. A lot of times, plus you draw a card. So that's a pretty good combat trick to have in your pocket, and definitely one to watch out for. Okay, let's talk about the top commons. Colorless. Mindstone is an easy one. I put Slippery Karst, Smoldering Crater because any of these cycling lands are going to be good when they're on color. Those are particularly good because you have payoffs for cycling in those colors. So those are the reason I picked those as the top commons in colorless. Not much more to say about that. I mean, if you know Mindstone, 2 mana, and you can immediately tap it for colorless, that's good ramp, and it cashes in for a card. Essentially, you would always take this. I don't know a deck that wouldn't play this card. I mean, even the Threshold deck, being able to put it in the graveyard, it's just a good card. For white, I like the removal. I don't think creatures are going to be super strong in this format. I definitely talked about some of the other white commons earlier on that other people are picking as their top commons. For me, you've got Pacifism, which is just gonna effectively remove stuff. Also, there's aura synergies in white with the Mesa Enchantress and such, and so I like Pacifism a lot. Momentary Blink, I think there's enough ETB abilities, not just in white-blue, but in all the colors, that Momentary Blink is going to be very useful, even if you can't flash it back, but especially if you can. And then Radiance Judgment, this is instant speed removal, removes the big threats, and you can cycle it if you don't need it. Just seems like it's going to be pretty solid. All right, the mythic common of the set, Mana War. Blue is super stacked. Mana War, Counterspell, and then Frantic Search, which is sort of just a free loot. Draw 2 cards, discard 2, untap up to 3 lands. There's a bunch of stuff that will use that, especially Storm. But any deck can really use the fixing and the what would you call that? The card selection from Frantic Search. Top commons black, not super surprised for the first 2. Terror, obviously, premium common removal in the set. Phyrexian Rager is going to be a premium creature in the set. It always is. 2/2 draw a card, lose a life. For the third common, I actually think Street Wraith is going to be pretty good. It will be useful in any deck that has red or green and some cycling payoffs, first of all, because you can just cycle it for 2 life. And then in the black decks, the ability to cycle for 2 life and have a 3/4 Swamp Walk. A 3/4 for 5 is not great, but it's not terrible in this format. There's a lot of creatures in this format that are stopped by a 3/4. A huge amount. So I could be wrong. It maybe won't line up as well as I think, but this is a card that actually sees play in a surprising amount of constructed decks, Street Wraith, and I think it will do well here. Chain Lightning, Sorcery Speed, Lightning Bolt, any target, remember, so it can go face also. And if your opponent's in red, I mean, there's always, you have to play around the idea that they can throw it back at you. It's a fun card. I love this card. I played with this card a lot when I was a kid. So it's cool to see it back here. And it's also just a good premium removal spell at common for red. Then I also think you're going to like Empty the Warrens. It's a playable card in pretty much any of the red decks, but in Goblins it's great, and in Storm it's like essential. So I think you're going to, if you want Empty the Warrens for your deck, you're going to want to take Empty the Warrens when you see Empty the Warrens. And then similarly, Mog War Marshal, 2 1/1s for 2 mana is great. And you can, if you have nothing else to do, you can pay that echo cost, I guess, and delay getting the 1/1. Of course, there are like ETB things you can do with it also. Just if you can blink it a bunch of times, you can get more 1/1s out of it. Green, Wild Growth combos with a bunch of stuff. Plus, it's just good ramp. Werebear is your backup ramp. I like that better than that. What was it? Whatever it was called, the one that filters for lands. This this one becomes a 4/4 as long as you have Threshold. And from everything I've read about Threshold, I never played any of the Threshold sets, but everything I've read about Threshold is that it's surprisingly easy to get 7 cards in your graveyard, and that's kind of my experience, especially if you're trying to build a little bit towards it. So I think in a lot of cases you're going to get a 4/4 mana dork for 2 that taps, a 4/4 mana dork for 2 mana essentially. So that's going to be pretty strong. On the other hand, you could pay 6 mana for a 4/4, but when it dies, it creates 4/1 insect creature tokens. This is just going to be a super annoying top end card. There's not a ton to ramp into, as we saw when we looked at the blue-green ramp deck. So this is going to be wanted by the green-black decks, and it's going to be wanted by the blue-green ramp decks. And who knows? I think it could be a decent top end in other decks. Obviously, you would prefer like a green creature that gains you life for 6 mana, but there isn't one of those. So Symbiotic Beast at least is going to give you tons of blockers on the ground. It's going to be probably as close as that big green stabilizer creature as you're going to get. All right, so what is your favorite card from a Dominaria set? Leave a comment and let me know. Do you like this kind of set breakdown? It takes me a long time to do, so I do appreciate hearing feedback if you liked it or enjoyed it or didn't like it or see ways to improve it, whatever. All kinds of feedback, very helpful. I know Broby1 Kenobi couldn't make it, but go subscribe to his Twitch. He's been killing it in Brothers War. And he has done a couple streams. And if you've watched the streams, you'd learn a lot about that draft format. And he's taken, I think, 3 accounts to Mythic in the last month. he loves the format. So check out my brother's channel. And check out my channel on YouTube here or on Twitch. I also do stream the drafts from time to time. With that said, all I'll leave you with is remember that Magic is a game so fun, even dads can enjoy it. Adios.